The permission slip was the size of an index card. That's what gets me when I think about it now, how small the thing was. A pre-participation physical form from Caleb's school, requiring a basic family medical history for the district's new health screening program. His teacher had sent it home in his backpack on a Thursday, folded inside a worksheet about state capitals. Caleb had pulled it out at the dinner table, announced it needed to be returned by Friday, and gone back to his chicken and rice without another thought. I filled it out myself. Cara was at her evening yoga class. She'd started going 3 times a week in the spring, which I'd encouraged because she'd seemed wound-tight for months, and I thought the stretching and the quiet would do her good. So, I sat at the kitchen table with a pen and worked through the form. Allergies, none. Previous surgeries, none. Family history of heart disease. I wrote my father's name and the year of his bypass. Family history of bleeding disorders. And I paused there, because I'd always had a mild clotting irregularity, nothing serious, flagged once during a routine physical in my late 20s. I wrote it down. Then, because the form asked for both parents' histories, I wrote what I knew of Cara's family. Hypertension on her mother Nadine's side. Her father's diabetes. Nothing unusual. I signed my name at the bottom. Joel Carver. Father. The screening happened 2 weeks later. A nurse and a pediatric technician came to the school, ran basic panels, blood pressure, vision, a finger prick blood draw for the type and basic markers. Standard stuff. I'd signed the consent form without a second thought, the way you sign 100 forms in the life of a school-age child. The results came back in a letter addressed to both parents. Cara opened it. She read it in the kitchen while I was in the garage reorganizing equipment bags for Monday's practice. She came to the door of the garage. She stood there for a moment without speaking. "Everything okay?" I said, not looking up. "Fine," she said. "All clear." She went back inside. I heard the letter go into the recycling bin, the soft sound of paper against cardboard. I registered it the way you register ambient noise, without processing it. The bin was right under the counter. She recycled things all the time. I didn't think about it again for 11 days. My name is Joel. I'm 38 years old, and I've been a high school football coach in Murfreesboro, Tennessee for 9 years, the last 4 as head coach at Riverside High, which is not a glamorous title in a mid-sized city but is exactly the life I wanted. I grew up here. I played here. I understand the specific weight of Friday nights in October when the bleachers are full and the air smells like popcorn and cut grass and something electric that has no other name. I met Cara at 26, at a mutual friend's cookout. She was 23, working as a dental hygienist, laughing at something across the yard when I first saw her. We were married 2 years later. Caleb came along 18 months after that, and from the moment I held him in the delivery room, 6 pounds, 11 ounces, a face scrunched like he was already skeptical of the world, I understood what people meant when they talked about a love that reorganizes everything. He plays flag football now. He's 8. He has Cara's dark eyes and a gap between his front teeth and an absolute certainty that the Dallas Cowboys are the greatest organization in professional sports history, an opinion I have been gently correcting for 3 years without success. For 10 years I thought I understood exactly what my life was. Then Trent said something in the parking lot after Tuesday practice that made everything stop. Trent has been my best friend since we were both 22 and sharing an apartment above a dry cleaning shop on Broad Street. He teaches P at the middle school, coaches JV baseball, and knows me well enough to know when I'm bothered before I do. He's also one of 3 people I trust completely in this world, Cara and my mother being the other 2. After Tuesday's practice, while I was loading the ball bag into the back of my truck, Trent leaned against the tailgate and said, "Hey. Random question. What blood type are you?" I told him, "O negative." He nodded slowly. Looked at the ground. Looked at me. "Cara's a positive," he said. "I remember because she donated at the school drive last year and mentioned it." I closed the tailgate. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Caleb had his screening results posted on the school health portal. Melissa, his wife, the school nurse, saw them when she was updating records. She didn't say anything to me. I found out by accident. But Joel. He stopped. Say it, I said. Two O-negative parents can have an A-positive child. I stood in the parking lot while the last of the assistant coaches drove out. The evening light was flat and orange. A crow landed on the chain-link fence beside the field and sat there, watching nothing in particular. I drove home in complete silence, and I did not know yet what I was driving toward. I need to go back before I go forward, because the before matters in a way I didn't understand while I was living inside it. Cara and I had a good marriage by any reasonable measure. Not a perfect one, no marriage is, and anyone who tells you otherwise is describing a performance. We argued about money sometimes, about the imbalance of domestic labor that I was repeatedly slow to correct, about the way I went quiet when I was stressed instead of talking, which she found maddening. Normal friction. The friction of two real people sharing a life rather than a fantasy. What I know now, reconstructing backward, is that there was a seam running through certain years I lived through completely blind to it. Caleb was born in the fall of our second year of marriage. Cara had been back at work for 6 months by then, and I had just taken the assistant coaching position at Riverside. We were busy in the way young parents with demanding jobs are always busy, running on caffeine and calendar alerts, passing the baby between us and doorways, collapsing into bed with a particular exhausted tenderness. I remember she was emotional in the months just before Caleb was born. I'd attributed it to pregnancy. She cried once watching a television commercial about a dog, and we'd laughed about it together. Another time she'd been very quiet for 3 days, and when I finally pressed her she said she was tired and overwhelmed, and I held her and believed that completely. I believe it still, in some sense. She probably was tired and overwhelmed. But I know now there were other dimensions to that silence. The first sign I consistently misread was the name. When we were choosing names, Cara had suggested Caleb with unusual certainty, not the kind of certainty that comes from loving a name, but the kind that comes from having already decided. I'd been partial to Nathan, after my grandfather. She'd listened to my case and said gently, clearly, that she felt strongly about Caleb. I'd let it go. It's a good name. I never questioned it. Caleb is also, I later discovered, the name of Preston's younger brother who died in a car accident when Preston was 19. Something Cara would have known. The second sign was the photographs. Cara had always been the family documentarian. She kept albums, organized the phone's camera roll by month, printed pictures through one of those mail-order apps and put them in frames. The first 3 years of Caleb's life were extensively, almost obsessively, documented. Then around his 3rd birthday, the photo-taking became less frequent. More selective. I'd noticed and commented once. You used to take pictures of everything. She'd laughed, and said she was less anxious about capturing every moment. I accepted that. Parents relax. Children grow. It made sense. What I didn't consider was why anxiety had been the frame in the first place. Trent, as it turned out, had his own earlier observation he'd never shared. About a year after Caleb was born, he'd run into Cara at a grocery store on a Saturday morning. She'd been with someone he didn't recognize, a tall man, good-looking, in a navy jacket. They'd been deep in conversation near the produce section. When she noticed Trent, she'd introduced the man as an old friend from college, and moved on quickly. Trent had thought nothing of it at the time. He mentioned it to me, haltingly, 3 days after the parking lot conversation. I didn't think it meant anything, he said. I still don't know if it did. But I knew the name Preston by then. And I knew he wasn't a college friend. The detail that had been sitting in my periphery for years without coalescing into anything useful was the way Cara sometimes looked at Caleb. Not always, not even often. But occasionally, in unguarded moments, there was an expression on her face that I'd interpreted as the normal wonder of parenthood, and now understood as something more layered. Something that was love but also grief, but also a particular kind of vigilance. Like a woman watching something precious that might be taken from her at any moment. I'd called it maternal. I'd found it beautiful. I found it, sitting in my truck outside our house on a Wednesday night, unable to go inside yet. I found it devastating. Caleb's teacher called me that week about a school project. He was doing a family tree assignment. She wanted to know if there were any family history sensitivities I'd want her to be aware of before the class worked through it. I said I'd need to think about it and call her back. I didn't call her back that week. I did not confront Cara. Not immediately. Not because I was strategic about it, not yet, but because I genuinely didn't know what I knew. What I had was trans information about blood types, which was damning mathematically but which I needed to verify. I am not a man who acts on second-hand information when the stakes are this high. I understand the weight of a false accusation. I've seen what they do on a football field when a referee makes a call without seeing the play clearly, and I've tried to apply that principle to my life. Get the full picture before you rule. So, I started quietly. The school health portal Trent had mentioned, parents had access to. I'd never logged in, because Cara handled those administrative details. I found the login email in my inbox from when the portal launched, reset my password, and got in at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night while Cara was asleep. Caleb's blood type was listed clearly, a positive. I looked at it for a long time. My vision went slightly strange at the edges, the way it does under extreme fluorescent light. I closed the laptop and went and stood in Caleb's doorway and watched him sleep. He was on his side, one arm thrown over a stuffed football I'd given him for his 5th birthday. His breathing was slow and even. He looked entirely, undeniably real, the most real thing in any room he occupied. I went back to bed. I did not sleep. I need to be honest about the next 2 weeks because they were not my finest in terms of clarity or proportion. I became briefly irrational. Not in ways that Cara noticed. I was careful about that, careful in a way that cost me, but internally I was running on a frequency of barely managed panic. I cycled through explanations. Laboratory error. A mix-up in the school's records. Some obscure genetic exception I didn't understand. I spent 4 hours one night reading medical literature about blood type inheritance, looking for a loophole, finding none that applied. 2 O-negative parents. 1 A-positive child. The math was not ambiguous. The red herring arrived in the form of Cara's cousin Derek, who I'd met twice at family gatherings. Nadine mentioned him in a phone call to Cara that I half heard from the hallway. Something about Derek having some kind of medical situation, a blood condition, test he'd had to have. I grabbed onto that thread desperately. Some hereditary blood condition. Something that might explain a typing anomaly. Something that let me not know what I was beginning to know. I called Nadine directly, which was unusual enough that she seemed surprised. I said I was asking about family medical history for Caleb's school forms. She told me about Derek's condition, a clotting issue, easily managed, on the paternal side of the family. Nothing that touched blood type. Nothing that helped. I thanked her. I asked, as casually as I could manage, whether Cara had ever mentioned the name Preston to her. A pause. Preston Hale? Nadine said. I'm not sure of the last name, I said. A longer pause. He was someone she knew before you, Nadine said carefully. A long time ago. Why? Just trying to remember who she'd mentioned, I said. Forget it. Thank you, Nadine. I hung up and sat in my truck in a gas station parking lot and understood that Nadine knew something. The specific quality of that pause told me she'd been sitting on it for a while. Preston Hale. I found him in 20 minutes online. 36, Brentwood address, real estate development. LinkedIn profile, professional headshot, a tall man with light hair and a square jaw. Handsome in a generic, forgettable way. I found a connection. He and Cara had attended the same university. Not just attended, they'd overlapped for 3 years. I found an old photo on a mutual acquaintance's social media, years old, of a group at a college event. Cara was in it. Preston was beside her. His hand was on her shoulder. I looked at the photo for a long time. Then I looked at Caleb's school picture, the one on the refrigerator, the gap-toothed smile. There was something in the jaw. The way the light caught the cheekbone. I put my phone face down on the passenger seat and drove home and helped Caleb with his math homework, and did not say a word. Trent's wife Melissa, the school nurse, was the one who finally provided the bridge I needed. She came to me carefully, came to our house on a Saturday morning while Cara was grocery shopping and Caleb was at a birthday party, and she sat at my kitchen table and said, "I need to tell you something I maybe should have said before." She'd recognized Preston's name in the school's emergency contact records. Not as a contact, as a flag? When the health screening had been processed, someone in the district health office had noted a blood type inconsistency and flagged it internally for follow-up. The follow-up was a letter sent home. The letter Cara had opened, read, and recycled within 60 seconds. The letter had noted the blood type discrepancy and suggested the family consult with a physician, as administrative errors in parental history documentation were possible, or alternatively, the family may wish to pursue confirmatory testing. Cara had known. She had opened that letter, understood it immediately, and put it in the recycling bin and told me everything was fine. That was the moment I stopped looking for loopholes. I ordered a home paternity test. I did not feel good about it. The kit arrived in a plain white box, and I kept it in my truck for 4 days before I could make myself open it. This was not a legal proceeding, the results would not be court admissible, but I needed to know before I could decide anything else. I needed to stop hoping I was wrong. The swab was easy. Caleb found the whole thing interesting. I told him it was a health check, which was not entirely a lie. He held still, cooperated, went back to his video game. I sealed the samples and sent them overnight. The wait was 8 days. They were the longest 8 days of my adult life. During those 8 days I coached 3 practices and a scrimmage. I ate dinner with my family every night. I helped Caleb build a Lego stadium. I listened to Cara describe a difficult patient and offered the appropriate sympathy. I laughed at appropriate moments. I functioned completely normally on the surface and felt, beneath it, like a man walking across ice, testing each step before committing his weight. Trent checked in daily, via text, a single word each time, "Okay?" I replied yes. That was the full extent of the conversation. He understood. The secondary complication arrived on day 5. Cara's mother Nadine called me again, this time initiated by her, which was unusual. She wanted to have lunch. Just the 2 of us, she said. She had something she wanted to talk about. I said I was busy this week. Could we do next week? She said yes, and something in her voice, careful, weighted, told me she was not calling about anything ordinary. She was going to tell me. I understood that. She'd carried something for years and the gas station phone call had shaken it loose, and now she was going to tell me in a booth at whatever restaurant she chose, with sweet tea and paper napkins, in her careful, Nadine way. Part of me wanted to let her. Part of me wanted someone else to say the words first. But the results arrived on day 8, and I read them alone in my truck in the school parking lot at 7 in the morning, before anyone else had arrived. Probability of paternity, 0%. Below that line, a second line in smaller text, almost clinical in its neutrality. The tested male is excluded as the biological father of the child. I folded the paper in half. Then in half again. I put it in the glove compartment. I walked into the building. I ran practice. I corrected blocking form and called out coverage adjustments and managed a minor conflict between 2 sophomores over playing time, and I did all of it with the paper sitting 60 yards away in the glove compartment of my truck. That is either strength or a form of dissociation. I'm still not entirely sure which. The red herring that had briefly complicated my picture resolved itself around day 6. I'd found a text on Cara's phone. I am not proud of how I found it, but I found it, from a number saved only as initials. RW. The messages were warm in a way that alarmed me. Thinking about you, can't wait to see you, you looked beautiful last week. 2 days of believing there was a second man entirely. 2 days of a different kind of spiral. Then I found the full context. RW was a woman, Rebecca, a friend from Cara's yoga studio. The warmth was the warmth of a close female friendship conducted in the slightly excessive language that close female friendships sometimes use. Completely innocent. I'd manufactured a second crisis out of abbreviations and anxiety. I mention this because it matters. By the time the results arrived, I had been through enough false directions that I'd stopped trusting my own interpretations. The results gave me something that could not be interpreted away. 0%. Not ambiguous. Not subject to my anxiety, or my grief, or my desperate wish to be wrong. I called Nadine that afternoon and told her she didn't need to have lunch with me. I told her I already knew. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'm so sorry, Joel. I've been sorry for 8 years. Did you know the whole time?" A pause. I suspected. I didn't ask. I think I didn't want to know. We stayed on the phone for a moment without speaking. Then I thanked her and ended the call. That night I sat in the backyard after Caleb was in bed, in the dark, in the August heat, and I tried to locate what I was feeling. Grief was in there, enormous and formless. But beneath it was something I hadn't expected, a kind of stillness. Like the particular silence after a very loud sound has finally stopped. I knew what I knew. I no longer had to wonder. The question now was what to do with it. I chose a Sunday. Caleb was at my mother's house for the weekend. I'd arranged it earlier in the week, telling her I needed Cara and I to have some time, that we had things to discuss. My mother is 71 and has known me for 38 years. She heard something in my voice and asked no questions. She made Caleb's favorite breakfast on Saturday morning and sent me a photo of him eating pancakes with his gap-toothed grin and a smear of syrup on his chin. Cara was in the kitchen when I came downstairs. Coffee made, dressed, looking out the window over the sink at the backyard. Perfectly ordinary Sunday morning light. The kitchen smelled of coffee and something floral from the candles she'd lit on the counter. I put the folded paternity results on the counter beside her coffee mug. She looked at the paper. She did not move for 3 full seconds. Then she set down her mug. She did not unfold the paper. She already knew what it was. "Cara," I said. She turned around. Her face was, I have tried many times to describe this and never quite gotten it right. Not surprised. Not caught. Something closer to resigned. Like a person who has been waiting a very long time at a bus stop and has just seen the bus come around the corner. "How long have you known?" she asked. "A few weeks." "Confirmed 8 days." She nodded slowly. Looked at the paper, then at me. "The screening letter. You recycled it," I said. "You told me everything was fine." "I panicked," she said. Quietly. No defense in her voice, just a plain word. "Tell me about Preston." She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I began to understand she'd had this conversation, in her head, probably hundreds of times, and was now discovering that none of the rehearsals had prepared her for the actual weight of it. "We were together for 2 years in college," she said. "I ended it when I moved here. When I met you." She stopped. "He came back. Once. We'd been married for 4 months. 4 months. Caleb is 8. I subtracted without meaning to. I did the arithmetic in my body before I did it in my mind. "Once," I said. "Once," she said. And I believed her, not because once made it better, but because the specific quality of her voice when she said it carried the particular weight of someone describing something they have never stopped paying for. "Did you know? When Caleb was born?" This pause was the longest. She folded her hands on the counter. "I didn't let myself know," she said. "I told myself it was impossible. I told myself the timing was wrong. I told myself." She stopped. "I needed it to be yours. But you suspected." "Yes." "And when the letter came?" "Yes." I walked to the window. The backyard was bright with late morning sun, the grass slightly overgrown, the tire swing I'd hung from the oak tree last summer turning slowly in no wind at all. I looked at it for a moment. "Does Preston know?" "No." Quickly, without hesitation. I never told him. I never contacted him after that. I ended it completely. I didn't want. She stopped again. What? I said. I didn't want him near any of it. Near Caleb. Near you. Near our life. She looked at me directly. I know that sounds like I was protecting myself. Maybe I was. But I was also protecting what we had. By lying about what we had. She had no answer to that. There was no answer that worked. I need to ask you something, I said. I turned back from the window. And I need you to understand that I'm not asking to punish you. I'm asking because the answer matters. She waited. Does he know Caleb's name? Something moved across her face, a small, terrible recognition. No, she said. I don't think so. She did not ask how I knew why I was asking. She understood. The name she had insisted on. The name she had held with such certainty. The name that belonged to a dead boy she'd known through a man she'd been with before me. It was the most honest moment of the entire conversation. The one thing she couldn't explain away. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table and talked for 3 hours. Not all of it was painful, some of it was the strangest, most disorienting combination of honesty and grief I have ever experienced. She told me things she had never said. I told her things I had never said. We were, in some ways, more fully present with each other in those 3 hours than we had been in years. At the end of it I said, I don't know what happens now. I know, she said. I need you to understand something. I said. Caleb is my son. Whatever else is true, that is true. I am not going to let a piece of paper change what 8 years built. She nodded. Her eyes were wet. But I can't stay in this, I said. Not right now. Maybe not ever. I don't know yet. She nodded again. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. I don't know if I would have responded differently if she had, but she didn't try to hold on in that moment, and I respected her for it. She moved to her mother's house 3 weeks later. Not because I asked her to leave, I didn't. We arrived at it together, slowly, in the weeks after the Sunday conversation, through a series of smaller conversations that each moved the same direction. She stayed through the first week because of Caleb, because of the ordinary business of school and routine and a child who needed stability. We were civil. More than civil, in some moments. There were evenings where we talked easily, almost naturally, and those were in some ways the hardest, because they showed me clearly what had existed between us and clarified exactly what was broken. I told Caleb that Mom was going to stay at Grandma Nadine's for a while, that we were working some things out, that he would see both of us all the time. He looked at me for a long moment with those dark eyes, Cara's eyes I'd always thought, though I understand now they may come from elsewhere, and said, Are you and Mom getting divorced? I said I didn't know yet. I said what I knew for certain was that I loved him and that was not going to change. He said okay, and went back to his Lego stadium. Children can hold more than we give them credit for, and also less. The art is in not knowing which you're dealing with on any given day. The legal dimension was managed quietly, through a mediator rather than a courtroom. Patricia, the attorney Trent recommended, efficient and compassionate in equal measure, helped me understand my options. Legally, in Tennessee, I was Caleb's father, I'd been present at the birth, my name was on the certificate, and 10 years of active parenting established the relationship. Nothing about the paternity results changed that unless I chose to pursue a legal challenge, which I did not. I would not. Preston Hale remained where he was, in Brentwood, unaware. Cara and I agreed, one of our few clean agreements, that contacting him served no one. If Caleb someday wants to know, that decision belongs to him, when he is old enough to hold it. Not to us, not now. Nadine called me on a Thursday evening, 6 weeks after Cara moved out. I almost didn't answer. When I did, she said, I want you to know that whatever you decide, you have been the best thing that happened to my daughter. And I'm not saying that to try to change anything. I'm saying it because it's true and you deserve to hear it. I thanked her. We stayed on the phone for a few minutes talking about Caleb, a school thing, an achievement she was proud of. Before she hung up, she said, "He's yours, Joel. He has been from the beginning." I knew what she meant. I also knew it was more complicated than that and less complicated than that, simultaneously, in the way the most important things always are. Cara came back in November. She'd been at Nadine's for 2 months. She called first, asked if she could come by, said she had something she wanted to say. I said yes. It was a Tuesday evening, Caleb at a friend's house, a cold night with the first suggestion of winter in it. She stood on the porch. She didn't come inside when I opened the door, which told me she'd already prepared herself for what was possible. She looked different. Not older exactly. More present. Like someone who has stopped performing for an audience that no longer exists. "I know this might not change anything," she said. "I just needed to say it once, in person, without anything else attached to it." She looked at me. "I'm sorry, Joel. Not the automatic kind. The kind that took me 10 years to actually understand." I looked at her for a moment. The cold air moved between us. "I know you are," I said. "Can we?" She stopped. "Is there any part of this that you could see a way through?" I thought about what Trent had said to me once, years ago, about forgiveness, that it wasn't something you decided, it was something you discovered, after enough time had passed, that you'd somehow done already. I thought about the 3 hours at the kitchen table. About Caleb's 8 years. About the tire swing turning in no wind. "No," I said. Not unkindly. Not with anger. Just clearly, the way you give a final call on a field, clear, complete, not subject to appeal. She nodded. She had prepared for this too. "Can I still see Caleb on the regular schedule?" "Nothing changes with Caleb," I said. "That's not on the table." She nodded again. Her eyes were steady and wet at the same time, which is something I didn't know eyes could be until that moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay," I said. She turned and walked to her car. I watched from the doorway until the tail lights disappeared at the end of the street. Then I closed the door. The house was quiet. The kitchen light was on. Caleb's Lego stadium was on the coffee table, half finished, waiting for him. I sat down on the couch and looked at it for a long time. That was the end of it. And also, in every way that matters, not the end at all. Caleb came home that Friday with a drawing he'd done in art class. He'd drawn a football field, green crayon, white lines, small figures and helmets. In the corner, he'd drawn 2 figures standing on the sideline. One tall, one small. He'd written underneath, in his careful second-grade print, "Me and Dad." I taped it to the refrigerator. Right next to a blue magnet shaped like the state of Tennessee. There is a particular kind of blindness that comes not from ignorance but from emotional investment, and Joel's story is built almost entirely on that foundation. He was not an inattentive husband. He was not incurious or careless. He was a man who had decided, at some fundamental level, that the life he built was sound, and who then filtered everything he observed through that assumption. The plainer detail from the name choice, Cara's quiet certainty about calling her son Caleb, a name with a private meaning Joel couldn't access, was available to him for 8 years. It registered as preference, not weight. That is the specific cruelty of this kind of red flag. It is only legible in retrospect, after the key that decodes it has already been forced into your hand. The blood type information is the story's axis, and what's striking is how it arrived. Not through investigation, not through suspicion, not through any action Joel took, but through a routine school form and a nurse's administrative eye. The exposure was entirely accidental, which is what gives the story its particular texture of helplessness. Joel had not been building toward a discovery. He had been building toward a Tuesday like any other Tuesday, and the truth ambushed him in a parking lot at the end of practice. That accident, the randomness of it, is what separates this from stories of investigated betrayal. He didn't uncover anything. Something fell through the ceiling. The letter Cara recycled is the story's first real turning point, and it matters enormously. Because Cara's decision in that kitchen moment was not a passive act. She read the letter, understood its implication, made a calculation in approximately 60 seconds, and told her husband everything was fine. Whatever guilt she'd carried for years, whatever private grief she'd managed in unguarded moments, this was a conscious choice to extend the concealment, not to confess when the door opened, but to close it quietly and walk away. That choice tells us something specific about how she had organized her internal life. The compartmentalization was not just emotional but operational. She had systems for this. The systems held for 11 more days. What shifts irrevocably is the second turning point, Melissa's revelation about the letter's content. Until that moment, Joel could still, theoretically, be managing an administrative anomaly, a blood type error, a record mix-up, something clinical and correctable. After Melissa's account, the possibility of innocent explanation collapses completely. Cara hadn't missed the letter, hadn't misunderstood it, she'd read it and made a choice. And Joel, who had given his wife 38 years of consistent, reliable trust, now had to understand that the trust had been a one-directional current for at least a decade. Two lessons live in the space between those turning points. The first is that love's generosity, the way it interprets ambiguous signals charitably, the way it finds innocent explanations for small inconsistencies, is also love's most exploitable quality. Joel's goodness worked against his clarity. The second lesson is harder to articulate but perhaps more important. The decisions we make in a single panicked moment tend to become the architecture of entire years. Cara's choice, for months into the marriage, was one moment. Every subsequent choice, to stay silent, to name her son the way she did, to recycle the letter, was the compounding interest on that first moment. The original error doesn't stay the size it started. It grows every time you choose to protect it. Nadine's presence runs through the story like a quiet current of moral weight. She suspected for years. She chose not to know. Her phrase, "I didn't ask. I think I didn't want to know," is a mirror of the exact mechanism Cara used to survive her own secret, the deliberate construction of a question you choose never to finish asking. The women in Cara's life had built parallel architectures of strategic not knowing, and it is both a comfort and a quiet indictment. What this story finally comes down to is the difference between a lie and an omission sustained over time, and how completely that distinction collapses under the weight of years. Cara did not lie to Joel every day in any active, deliberate sense. She built a silence and lived inside it, and the silence did the work. But silence, over a decade, becomes its own kind of deception, not because the truth grows more false but because the person being deceived grows more invested in the fiction, more deeply woven into a reality that was never completely real. The damage here is not just marital. It is existential in the way that only paternity revelations can be. Because Joel did not lose a relationship, he lost the foundational premise of 8 years of fatherhood. He loved Caleb unreservedly, completely, without condition. That love was real. But the story he believed about where Caleb came from, the story that connected his own blood and history to this child, was false. And even though Joel chose, wisely and with tremendous integrity, to remain Caleb's father in every sense that matters, there is a private reckoning in that choice that no one else can fully see. He had to grieve a version of his life that never existed while continuing to inhabit the life itself. That is an extraordinary kind of discipline, and it should not be mistaken for easy. The door closing on Cara at the end of November was not cruelty. It was the honest conclusion of a man who had done the work of understanding what was real and what wasn't, and had decided clearly that the gap between the two was too large to cross. Some distances can't be forgiven into manageable size. He knew that. So did she. What I keep coming back to is the name. Caleb. 8 years of calling that name across a yard, from a sideline, through a dark house at bedtime. 8 years of that name meaning my son in the most complete and unquestioned way. And Cara knew, somewhere beneath everything she told herself, that the name carried a weight Joel couldn't see. She chose it anyway. Maybe that was grief made practical, or love made complicated, or guilt made permanent. I don't know. But I think the name is where the real cost of the secret lies, not in the legal documents, not in the paternity results, but in that single word, said thousands of times, by a man who didn't know everything it meant.